Today we're down here in Southern California taking a look at the all-new Hyundai Elantra. This is a hotly anticipated model because this is one of Hyundai's best-selling vehicles worldwide. It's the third best-selling compact sedan in America, and even though sedan sales aren't exactly on fire in North America, this is probably going to be one of the best-selling vehicles in the segment because there's a lot less competition than there used to be. But that's not the only reason. We also have an all-new hybrid model. That's the red one I'm standing right next to here. The standard model over here. There's also going to be an N Line performance model. It's going to get a 1.6-liter turbo, and then there's going to be a full-on N variant with even more power under the hood coming soon. Hyundai's designers say that they don't want all the vehicles to look like scale versions of one another. So even though this is identifiable as a Hyundai immediately, it doesn't look like a mini-me version of the Sonata. We have a very similar grille shape, but different grille elements, different headlights up front as well. This model has full LED headlamps. Now, rather unfortunately, you will only find these headlights in the absolute top-end trims. I don't know what the N will be like when we finally see that. The turn signals are right here inside this little area, and they are incandescent. No fog lights down here in the corners. Hyundai calls this grille design their parametric grille, and in fact that's actually the phrase they're using to describe the entire angular style of their most recent models. Now, even though this looks a little bit different than the larger Sonata, they claim that this also is the sensuous sportiness family of design, but you can definitely tell that things are a little bit less styled, a little bit less expensive in some ways on the Elantra. So for instance, the hood doesn't come all the way down to the front, but we have very similar styling elements to keep it in the family. But again, having a different look than simply a scaled model down version of the Sonata. At just over 184 inches long, the Elantra is notably longer than its predecessor. This is now one of the longer compact sedans in America, and that really pays dividends when it comes to rear seat legroom, which was a tight commodity in the previous generation Elantra. This now has class-leading rear legroom and a pretty big trunk as well. But the most interesting thing you'll notice from the side profile is what's going on with the styling. You can see that we have the same sort of geometric shapes on the side that we found up front. This is not quite as aggressive and edgy as we see in the new Tucson, but it definitely is in the same family. Be sure and let me know what you think about the styling down there in the comments section. This is definitely a lot more expressive and emotional than the Elantra has been in the past. It was often accused of being a bit boring, to be honest, and whatever you think of this, it's certainly not boring anymore. We have this enormous sort of ducktail spoiler right here on top of the trunk lid. No exhaust tips visible to the driver right there. We just have these sort of imitation exhaust areas here. If you'd like to show off your tailpipes, you should get the N Line because that's going to have a slightly different bumper treatment, or of course the full-on N whenever that comes in. The tail lamp modules on this non-hybrid model are all incandescent. So we just have an LED light strip there, but the brake lights, the turn signals, the backup lights, those are all incandescent. If you get the hybrid model, then we get LED brake lights, but it's still a combination element. So the backup lights and the turn signals are still regular old bulbs. As you'd expect out of a new Hyundai, there's a ton of active driver assistance technology standard. We get forward collision warning, driver monitoring, blind spot monitoring, lane keeping assistance, and then optionally radar adaptive cruise control is available that will expand the autonomous braking for cyclist detection. We also have rear parking sensors and Hyundai's new highway driving assistance system. At least at launch, the Elantra is going to be available with 3 different drivetrains. The base model is going to get a 2-liter 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine. That's the one over here in silver. That gives you 147 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque. The only transmission on offer with this engine is a continuously variable transmission that Hyundai calls IVT. Fuel economy comes in at 37 miles per gallon combined for the 2-liter engine, but if you want even better fuel economy, there's going to be this all-new hybrid system. Actually, it's not really all new. This is essentially a hybrid system borrowed out of the Hyundai Ioniq with some additional tweaks for the new Elantra. This is a 1.6-liter 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine mated to a 6-speed dry dual-clutch transmission. On the other side of the engine bay, there's a 43 horsepower electric motor, and on this side, there's an 11 horsepower starter generator unit. Those together allow this vehicle to operate in electric-only mode with the 43 horsepower motor, or operate as either a serial or parallel hybrid, giving you 139 horsepower total. Fuel economy comes in at 50 miles per gallon if you get the top-end limited trim, mainly because of the tire size. It gets 225 width tires. If you get the base model, you get 205 width tires, and that bumps fuel economy up to 54 miles per gallon combined. That is better than we see in the Toyota Corolla Hybrid or in the Honda Insight Hybrid. Also available at launch, there's going to be a 1.6-liter turbocharged engine, but if you want to know more about that one, be sure and check out my N Line review. Bearing in mind that I haven't had a huge amount of time in the Elantra today, I'm going to give these seats 8 out of 10 points. This top-end model does have a 2-way power adjustable lumbar support, but it's not a 4-way lumbar, which would be my preference. The passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat, and even in this top-end trim, it's not powered. The driver gets a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion, and if you get the hybrid trim only, then there's a 2-position seat memory for the driver. Compared to the previous generation Elantra, the roofline was lowered about an inch, and the seats are about an inch closer to the ground, so headroom remains the same as the previous model. Headroom is still pretty generous back here. If I put my head all the way back there to the headrest, my head is just barely touching the ceiling, but in a more natural sitting position, my hair is just barely brushing the ceiling. So as far as rear seat accommodations go, even though we have this swoopy profile and a sleeker roofline, this is still pretty accommodating. The big change, however, is in legroom. We have a massive amount of legroom, putting this really at the top of the compact class. In fact, there are a few mid-size sedans that have a little bit less legroom than we find in the Elantra. And as we've seen in Hyundai vehicles for a while, the front seats have a really long seat track, so if you're a taller driver with longer legs and you're looking for a compact vehicle, you should be able to fit in this without a problem. But remember that the Elantra is still a compact vehicle, so this is going to be less accommodating for instance, 3 adults across the back. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion, and we have a padded center armrest with cup holders, but there's no seat release right here in the inside of the vehicle. One thing that surprised me in the rear of the Elantra is that we don't have rear passenger air vents. The rear seats fold flat, but they don't fold completely flat with the cargo area in the back, and that means it is going to be a little bit trickier for a Sofian to crawl from the trunk right back here into the passenger area.
Yeah, I don't think I fit through here, honestly.
But your waist, I could fit through there. You're way skinnier than me. Look, let's see how it's done. See, that's how it's done. Cargo capacity comes in at just over 14 cubic feet, which puts this right between the Corolla and the Civic in the compact sedan lineup. The trunk hinges do impact the cargo area just a little bit, as does this optional subwoofer, but this is still one of the most accommodating cargo areas in the segment. One thing I dislike, however, is that there's no helper handle to help you close the trunk lid. That leaves you to paw on the painted section of the trunk or some of these upholstered sections inside. In my exclusive trunk comfort index, I'm going to give this 8 out of 10 points. A nice touch back here is that we do have a compact spare tire and enough room to put a full-size spare tire if you wanted to aftermarket. An interesting touch is that if we move over to the hybrid model, you notice that the floor is not quite the same. There's still a temporary spare tire in here, but not enough room for a full-size spare. I'm starting my interior look around inside the non-hybrid model. This is the top-end limited trim, but the feature set is a little bit different whether you get the hybrid or the non-hybrid. This has the available two-tone interior, which I definitely think is my preference. We have a pretty standard-sized moonroof right here over the driver and front passengers' heads. Height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. A really nice touch in this interior is Hyundai's use of fabric inserts. So in addition to the leather, you can see that we have a fabric insert right there on the seat back and on the seat headrest, and of course right back there on the rear doors as well. We see the same fabric with some additional stitched lines on the front door that really helps dress things up. But as you'd expect in a vehicle with a $19,500 price point, the upper plastics on the door are definitely hard. There are a lot of hard plastics going on in here, but there are also a lot of high points. So we do have a soft touch injection molded upper section of the dashboard, hard plastics lower, and then this continuous vent-like theme. But in this particular vehicle, there are no vent holes right here in the middle, just sort of as a fake vent there. In the middle of the dashboard, we have a center channel speaker, a rarity in this particular segment, and the optional 10.25-inch touchscreen LCD instrument cluster. If you get the base version of the Elantra, then an 8-inch LCD is standard. Down here we have some physical controls for that infotainment system. You'll also find the engine start-stop button right there, and the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control system. Let me know what you think about this design down there in the comment section. I really like the two-tone look in here, and I like the way that they've laid things out. Instead of all the touchscreen buttons that we find in so many new vehicles, like Hyundai's brand new Tucson, we still have some physical controls here, which definitely is my preference. Down here we have a USB input for the infotainment system, 12-volt charge port, regular USB charge port there, a wireless charging mat. The shifter is a pretty traditional design. Drive is all the way back there. There's a sport mode and a manual gear shift mode, both in the hybrid and in the non-hybrid model. We have a drive mode button there, a button to turn on and off the parking camera. This one does not have a 360-degree camera, just a backup camera there. Electric parking brake, auto brake hold, and then we have two very large cup holders right here in the middle of the center console, and then sort of a armrest or hand grip right there. Between the front seats, we have a padded center console that opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment. It's pretty similar in size to most compact sedans. One of this interior's striking features is the available full LCD instrument cluster that gives us a second 10.25-inch LCD right there in front of the driver. The steering wheel is a round 4-spoke design, very similar to what we see in the brand new Sonata. We have some pretty aggressive sport grips up top, hard plastic inserts right here around this section, and then this particular steering wheel is leather wrapped. On the right side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the adaptive cruise control system if you get that option, also the optional highway driving assistant enable disable button, and then on the left side of the steering wheel, we find buttons for the infotainment system. Jumping into the hybrid, we have very much the same interior, but there are a few key differences. If we take a look at the door panels, for instance, we don't find the fabric inserts that we found in that other limited trim. In this model, they're imitation leatherette, a little bit more in keeping with the seat design. The seats themselves are also slightly different because these seats are ventilated in addition to being heated. So you can see over here on the center console, we have some slightly different controls here for those ventilated seats. The instrument cluster and the LCD infotainment system remain the same. One oddity is that the hybrid model is the only model currently with the driver's side 2-position seat memory. It's integrated into the speaker grille right there on the driver's door. Going in for a closer look at the infotainment system in the dashboard, this is the larger infotainment system available in the Elantra. The standard system is an 8-inch touchscreen that does feature standard Apple CarPlay and standard Android Auto. One oddity with the setups in the Elantra is that the larger screen that we see here does not currently support wireless CarPlay. Now, Hyundai said that that is something they're working on, but basically this is the latest generation of their infotainment software. It's actually slightly more advanced than the one that we find in the 8-inch screen, and that particular feature apparently isn't ready yet. You'll notice that the style of the Elantra's infotainment software icons are definitely different than we find in the rest of the Hyundai lineup. Over here we have a hybrid screen because I am currently inside the hybrid model. Sorry for jumping around between vehicles a little bit here in the video, so you can see more of how the different options look. The mapping system is pretty similar to the rest of the Hyundai line, as you can see right there. The key difference between the larger infotainment system and the smaller system is that in the larger system, this is where you adjust vehicle settings rather than in the instrument cluster like we find in most Hyundai and Kia models. On the driver's side, we have something unusual for a compact sedan in America, and that's an available full LCD instrument cluster. Unlike some of the LCDs that we've seen in Hyundai vehicles before, this one is a little bit more configurable. So we have 4 different themes to choose from. They can be linked to the drive modes. This is the basic theme there. There's also a sportier theme, as you can see. There's also more of an eco-focused theme that has a bit more of a traditional display to it. And then we have this very unusual look right here where we have some little cubes, and they do rotate around as you're driving, and they constantly sit there and blink. This display is a little bit different in the non-hybrid model. In the hybrid model, we obviously have something very focused on fuel economy over here on this side. The most unusual thing about the LCD instrument cluster really isn't the instrument cluster itself, it's what's going on over here on the left side. This is a blank sheet of plastic with this stylized circle and line right there that's just printed on. It doesn't actually do anything, there's no control over there, there's no additional LCD. It's trying to make the instrument cluster look a little bit more symmetrical with, of course, the touchscreen infotainment system that's happening over here on the right, but this design definitely is a little bit unusual. I kind of wish that Hyundai had put something over here, perhaps some sort of control bank or something like that. Perhaps the buttons and controls that are down here could have been relocated into that area, because this does seem just a little bit odd. The first thing you're going to notice about the Elantra Hybrid out on the road is the 0 to 60 time. This is going to be the slowest version of the Elantra. Rather unfortunately, I haven't been able to 0 to 60 test this particular model out here in Southern California, but it's likely going to be very similar to the Hyundai Ioniq, so right around 9.5 seconds or so. This hybrid system produces about the same amount of power that we find in the Ioniq system, and the vehicle is basically the next generation of what we find underpinning the Ioniq. Although the Elantra Hybrid in this top-end trim wears 225 width tires, the same tire width that we find in the regular Elantra, these are more eco-focused tires, and that will have an impact on your 60 to 0 stopping distance and, of course, the handling ability. But the Hybrid has a trick up its sleeve. Like the Elantra N and the Elantra N Line, this has an independent rear suspension, and the regular Elantra doesn't. That means that even though absolute grip appears to be just a little bit lower than the regular Elantra, the suspension feels better sorted, especially out on a rougher road in the corners. This suspension doesn't appear to get as upset as the one in the regular Elantra can get, although both are very, very well polished. Both definitely have a great feel in this segment. This is a lot closer, however, to the Honda Insight than the Toyota Corolla in terms of its general feel, and I think that the regular Elantra is just a little bit further away. Having a fully independent suspension in an inexpensive compact vehicle used to be a bit of a rarity, but that's not the case anymore. However, it is worth noting that the Elantra is not alone in having a non-independent suspension in the base model. All versions of the Mazda 3, for instance, don't have an independent rear. And when compared against the Mazda 3, this suspension certainly feels more sorted when you're really pushing it harder out on a winding mountain road that's less than perfectly paved. I don't have any ability to test the cabin noise score out here in Southern California, rather unfortunately, but this appears to be pretty average compared to the Civic, the Corolla, the Insight, etc. As you might expect, the ride quality in the Elantra comes in pretty middle of the pack. This is not as firm as some versions of the Honda Civic, but also is not as soft as some of the versions of the Toyota Corolla. Fuel economy is a little bit difficult to gauge out here in Southern California. According to Hyundai, this should average 50 miles per gallon in the trim that I'm driving here, 54 if you get the model with the skinnier tires. The tire size is important to keep in mind because that's the way that most of the competition, and of course the base model of the Elantra, get to their really high fuel economy scores, especially in the most efficient trims. One thing that's interesting about the hybrid model is that initial get up and go, thanks to the electric motors, actually feels peppier than the non-hybrid model. But once you get underway, it's clear that this is going to be the slower version of the Elantra. Part of that difference in acceleration is also the fact that this uses a 6-speed dual clutch transmission, so it feels like a traditional automatic transmission. And rather unfortunately, traditional automatics are just not as efficient as CVTs, especially when accelerating, and that's likely the reason that that is a little bit faster. According to the numbers, the Elantra should be almost as efficient as the Hyundai Ioniq, but we see a very similar split between this and the Ioniq, and of course the Corolla and the Prius. Some of that has to do with the aerodynamic shape of the vehicle. The Ioniq and the Prius have a very similar aero shape, and that tends to be a very, very efficient profile. That's why the Model 3, the Model X, the Model Y, etc., a lot of EVs have that same general profile as the modern day Prius. Aside from that, the drivetrain is very similar, as I've said before, so if you don't like the way the Ioniq feels out on the road, you're probably not going to like the way this feels out on the road, but if you're okay with the Ioniq, you'll probably like the Elantra as well. Your fuel economy will really depend on your driving style, where you're able to drive the vehicle, etc. Over a quick day of mixed driving in this, but mainly highway driving, I should say, we've been averaging about 47 to 48 miles per gallon. If I was a little bit heavier on the right pedal or carving some of the canyons right here around Malibu, fuel economy dropped down to about 37 miles per gallon combined, but still very good for a compact vehicle. In general terms, this should have better highway fuel economy than we find in the Honda Insight due to the design of the hybrid system. That's something that I've noticed in a lot of Honda's hybrids in the past that does not apply to the Hyundai hybrids or the Toyota hybrids. And that's because this has that 6-speed stepped transmission. In the Insight and other Honda hybrids, there's just one fixed gear ratio between the wheels and the engine when operating in parallel hybrid mode, and that doesn't seem to be the most efficient way of driving a vehicle forward. Bottom line, in the Elantra Hybrid out on the road is honestly pretty easy. If you're looking for an Elantra with better fuel economy and almost no compromises, you should definitely take a look at the Elantra Hybrid. In fact, there are a few reasons that you might want to get this over the regular Elantra if you don't like the way a CVT feels, if you want slightly snappier initial acceleration, or you want those stepped ratios for whatever reason, then this is going to be the model of Elantra for you. Hopping into the non-hybrid model for a moment, the first thing you're obviously going to notice is the fact that we do have a real continuously variable automatic transmission under the hood. So most of the time this is going to sound a little bit like a CVT, the engine's just going to hang out at certain RPMs, but Hyundai has programmed it to imitate stepped gear ratios, and this shifts almost as quickly as the Honda CVT that we find in the Civic. This is probably my second favorite CVT out on the market right now. Honda's CVT seems to shift a little bit faster, it seems to imitate a stepped automatic transmission a little bit better, but this is certainly better than what we find in the Toyota Corolla. Toyota has recently tried to improve their CVT by giving it a physical first gear for launches, but still not going to feel quite as sorted as this particular transmission. And it's definitely not going to shift as quickly in passing style maneuvers or just if you're trying to get ahead of someone in traffic. The other thing you'll notice about the non-hybrid model is that we actually get a little bit less engine noise in the cabin than we find in the 1.6-liter hybrid. And that did surprise me because this is a larger displacement engine. And of course, CVTs are known for having sometimes unusual harmonics because that engine is just hanging out at a particular RPM as you accelerate. But actually we find a little bit more cabin isolation in the regular Elantra. When it comes to fuel economy, clearly the hybrid is going to beat the non-hybrid model, but this has still been pretty decent. Over a day of mixed driving out here near Malibu, I've been averaging 34 miles per gallon. I suspect that once I get this at home and I can run this through my usual drive tests, it's probably going to be right there around the EPA number. Something that definitely surprised me is that the base engine in the Elantra does not have auto start-stop. And that's something that we're seeing in a ton of brand new vehicles out there because it helps improve your city fuel economy score, but a lot of folks don't like it. So if that's a feature you're hoping to avoid, this Elantra does not have that at all. Differences in suspension tuning between the fully independent rear suspensioned hybrid model and the partially independent suspensioned regular model are pretty subtle. But out on broken pavement, you will notice that this has a little bit more rear end float. It doesn't feel quite as sorted as the hybrid model. So if I were simply choosing one of these vehicles based on ride quality, I would choose the hybrid. If I was simply choosing a vehicle based on cabin isolation, I would choose this model over the hybrid. And if I were looking for driving enjoyment, I think it's a pretty tough call between the two. Hyundai's done a good job of making this CVT shift quickly. So if you're driving this out in your favorite winding mountain road, you have it in a sport mode, and you're flooring it around here and there, it definitely has the feel of traditional gear shifts. You can really hear it there, how quickly the engine revs up. But of course, if you really want that solid stepped automatic feel, you will find that only in the hybrid model or the N Line model, because those use dual clutch transmissions, not CVTs like the model that I'm driving here. So how does the Elantra compare with the rest of the sedans in this segment? Well, clearly you'll have to wait until I can get my hands on one for a complete week so I can run it through my usual battery of comparisons and tests. But let's talk about what I like and what I don't like about the Elantra right now. I really like the styling. The Elantra definitely stands out in this segment, and styling is a major reason that most people choose the cars that they end up choosing. I think that the Insight looks a little bit more restrained and elegant than what we find in the Elantra, but remember, the Elantra is significantly less expensive. The non-hybrid model will start at $19,650. That gets you the standard automatic transmission. So some of the competition will start out with the manual transmission. You have to option up into the automatic. The automatic is standard on the Elantra, as is this crazy, really angular design. So you either love it or you hate it, but if you love it, the Elantra is definitely a place to look. Now, if you want the hybrid model is going to be more expensive, $23,550. And I think the hybrid model is the one that I would choose, mainly because of the way the hybrid drives. We get the fully independent suspension rather than the partial independent suspension that we find in the non-hybrid model. That definitely improves the ride quality and the handling ability, especially out on rougher pavement. Another reason you might want to take a look at the hybrid over the non-hybrid is the transmission. This again uses a 6-speed dual clutch transmission, so it's going to feel much more like a traditional automatic transmission. So if that's something that you're after, definitely keep the hybrid model in mind. Now, the tires that we have on the hybrid mean that it's probably not going to hold the road quite as well as the non-hybrid model, but if you were really interested in handling, you'd be looking at the N Line or the upcoming full Elantra N. On the inside of the Elantra, I really like some of the nice touches that we have. The interior styling, I think, is absolutely the best in this segment. I prefer this interior styling over what we find in the brand new Mazda 3, which is also elegant, but in an entirely different way. This infotainment system is much easier to use. Wireless smartphone integration is also available in the Elantra, but unfortunately the top-end screen does not currently offer that feature, and you will only find this interior in the very top-end limited models with the twin LCD arrangement. That's very attractive, definitely very unique, and very cost-effective, because this non-hybrid model, as equipped right here, came in around $25,000 before destination, and that hybrid model right over there, just around $28,000. So even though a lot of the features that we've looked at today are optional on the Elantra rather than standard, you will find them on the Elantra for comparable pricing to most mid-level trims of the competition. So the value proposition is definitely still hard at work here at Hyundai, as is the long standard warranty. If you're looking for a long warranty, that's another reason that you might want to take a look at these options. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. And again, let me know what you think about the aggressive angular styling on the Elantra. The rear end here is certainly a bit more controversial than the front, but I'd love to know what all of you think about the styling in general. Be sure and find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places, and of course, check out the new merch store at AOAmerch.com. I'll see all of you next week.